Good morning and welcome to the October 13th, 2020 Polk County School Board work session. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here this morning, and a welcome to our guests in the audience today. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to our superintendent, Mrs. Jacqueline Bird. Ms. Bird, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you, everyone, and happy October, and welcome to everyone for our work session today. This morning, I would like to begin with our first item, which is the Strategic Technology and Business Process Alignment Project, and Dr. Barrios will introduce our guests.
Good morning, everybody. Meridian Partners is going to do a presentation today after doing a broad assessment of our current business processes and the current technologies that we have. This is really in alignment with the work we've been doing in the last 5 years, and one of the big things are the aging software and aging technologies that we have. So we asked them to come in and look at a big picture, including RHS. So they did an assessment of SAP, but they also did an assessment of all the different programs that work with SAP or alongside of SAP. So they're going to present the results of that assessment. So Greg, you guys can go ahead and go. Sorry about that.
Great. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Greg.
Perfect. So I'm Greg Value. I'm SVP of Strategy and Innovation with Meridian Partners. And with me I have Kim Berkey, and we'll introduce ourselves in more detail in a moment, who's the VP of Public Sector. Today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some quick remarks here. We'll talk a little bit about the project goals. We'll talk about the scope, the methodology, and process. We'll talk about the key influences on your processes. And then we'll dive into the recommendations summary and findings. And then we'll highlight some specific process areas. And then there were some other broader topics that we reviewed related to your SAP system. And we'll talk a little bit about what we would suggest as a roadmap. And then we'll leave it open for some questions and discussion. So again, I'm Greg Value. I'm the SVP of Strategy and Solutions, and my responsibilities really are the client journey from the start of a client relationship to the successful rollout and delivery of whatever solution we're delivering. I've worked with you all at Polk County. It's probably been off and on for about 10 years, depending upon what projects we have going. And I've worked with a lot of other notable K through 12 districts within the state of Florida. So again, that's a little bit about me. I won't take up too much time talking about myself, although I like to. But again, I want to thank you all for giving us this opportunity. And before we get started, because Kim's going to drive a lot of the process here, I just want to thank everyone at Polk County Public Schools for helping make this project a success. We had amazing turnout and folks that took part in workshop sessions in the midst of the pandemic. This all kicked off right at the start of COVID, and I know you all had a lot going on, and there were a lot of changes here, but it was highly successful. Folks really did a great job of taking part in the workshops, providing this information, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we are just so proud of the staff there. They were just amazing. You have some great people, and Tina's leadership was amazing, and actually Cindy Wells too, and Mike Perone in helping make this a success.
Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, good. Just checking. You know, when I'm in the room in person, I never have to ask that question. Hi, I'm Kim Berkey. I am the Public Sector Solutions Lead at Meridian Partners. My journey, I just say over 25, because when you reach a point, you don't want to say how much over 25 years in doing working with ERP, particularly SAP, but when folks ask what I do for a living, I say I'm a translator. And basically, I try to translate business language to technical language and back again, which is not always an easy bridge to cross. So it's the ongoing challenge of what does the business need and what can the technology provide, and trying to facilitate those types of communications. So my background varies. For those of you that like chocolate, my initial SAP implementation was with the Hershey company. But my experience varies from being on the customer side to also being on the consulting side, working in many different sectors, but mainly concentrating in public sector. And most recently, in the past few years, kind of specializing in the K-12 space. And I'm coming to you live from Pennsylvania, so I'm not in Florida. But so hopefully the internet in Pennsylvania holds out today. Greg, did you want to go through the initial goals, or do you want me just to roll with this?
Sure. You can go through the initial goals.
Okay. So the initial goals as we started this engagement, and I think one of the things I want to point out before I read what's on the slide is I want to mention right away that it is incredibly common for organizations that have large ERP systems, and especially if they have them over many years, to realize they're not utilizing the full capability of their systems. And I think, based on my experience, I think this happens particularly in public sector where your resources or your funding may be limited. So as we go through and we talk about the project goals and we talk about some of the findings, I really wanted to frame that up by saying, kind of echoing what Greg said, that it is encouraging that your district and your leadership recognizes that you have an opportunity to leverage the investment you've already made, and that took the time to assess that and look to how to make that better. So I always want to frame it that way, because I have a lot of clients that will say, oh, are we really this messed up? Or look, they found things. I just want everyone to start off knowing that's not uncommon. These are large systems. They're very powerful. They can do a lot, but you also, usually when folks implement them, you're just figuring them out, right? You're just learning. And so I wanted to frame that. And again, say that I think it's great that you guys recognize that you have something that you can leverage to make things better in your business area. Excuse me. So essentially, the goals were to take a look at your those areas of optimization, provide guidance on certain topics that you guys, certain questions that you were pondering, and provide some perspective that we have not only from working with your district, but from working with other clients. And also, and I think this last one is incredibly important, to provide a platform for you folks to communicate your ideas and questions. I am a big advocate of user-centric, right? That's that translation that I'm talking about. You can't bridge that gap without having a user-centric approach. So I'm going to move through these. I apologize. I am going to move a bit quickly because I want to be respectful of your schedule today. But I want to point out that we're going to leave some time at the end here for you folks to ask questions. So if I'm going too fast on any particular one thing, don't feel free to follow up at the end with any questions or clarifications you may need. So as part of the assessment scope, here are some of the areas that we reviewed. We took a look at your security. We looked at, there's a basis health check, and I'll explain a little bit what basis is if you're not familiar with that term. Some of your functional areas such as payroll, HR, finance and accounting, asset management, warehouse and inventory, procurement, funds management, budgeting, project systems, and then as I mentioned, there was also some additional topics that you folks just wanted us to review. In terms of the methodology that we used, this is what I meant by user-centric. So I think it's always important to start with listen and learn. It is easier, not gonna lie, it's a lot easier to do this when you're in person on site. And as Greg mentioned, we did have some constraints. I love having folks in a room, and I love the diversity of perspective and the interaction you get when everybody's in a room. But You folks did a great job of pivoting and still allowing us to have those conversations and still get some of that feedback, even though we had to do quite a bit of it remotely. In addition to the listen and learn, part of the learn part is we review some of your documentation, your controls, taking a look at any of the solution documentation that you may have. Then the define, we're looking a little further into your system. The analysis, we're kind of comparing that to what we know to be best demonstrated practice. And then the findings, coming back with a suggested roadmap, and prioritizing those items based on what we learned. For your assessment, you can see some of the steps that we did is we did those pre-engagement interviews. So our project manager, Mike Puja, did a great job of having conversations with many of your folks there to give us some of that preliminary information. And that helped us when we had our specialized consultants to kind of target the key questions they wanted to ask. So it gave some great background information. We did have an on-site kickoff, which was great because we did actually get to meet face-to-face with some of you folks. And then, as I mentioned, the artifact gathering, additional interviews, additional workshops, the review of your system, and then compiling the information. As I mentioned before, I want to point out that there is a strong desire to improve processes and technology. And the reason we keep saying that is because we don't always see that. So I'm very passionate about this when I see folks who really want to make a difference. I tell everybody that my career goal right now is just to do cool stuff with cool people. And yes, it's nice to get paid for it, but you've got some really cool people. So it's great when people recognize that you need to take a look at it. So as you notice, the willingness to improve the processes is excellent. There are some risks, so not sugarcoating it. We did find some things, but that's why you guys asked the question. And so we'll go through these in a slightly more detail, but then there's a lot more information behind it if anybody has any additional questions. So as a summary, we provided in the time that we were there about around 160 suggested recommendations in the report that we provided. We did classify those into different categories, areas where we thought there were more significant risk and areas where there's just maybe opportunities for improvement. And also want to mention areas where you guys are already doing existing good practice. So don't want to lose sight of the fact that in a lot of what you're doing, you guys were already doing what we would consider to be the best practice. So it isn't always about, looking at everything that's wrong, but it's also saying, hey, if you're doing a best demonstrated practice, we want to point that out so you keep doing it. And we had many of those as well. So walking through, I want to just walk through the recommendation highlights and again point out these are very high level. There's a lot more detail that goes behind these. But from a general perspective, so this applies to kind of all of your functional areas, all of your systems, so to speak. We have some recommendation on how you can improve processes around your program and project management. And I see this a lot, particularly in K-12, where functional areas can sometimes just work more in silos, or you do specific projects. But with an enterprise system, it's always advantageous to try to take on more of an enterprise view and kind of recognize everything that's in your portfolio, so that you can use that information to prioritize, your highest needs. There are some improved processes around ways to get kind of more formalize your requirements gathering. You've got good business analysts that really want to make a difference for your user community. It's just some basic methodology and structure around how to do that, how to improve those translation skills, so to speak. Establishing a release cadence and testing, master data governance. All of those things, again, are just basic kind of ITSM, ITIL practices that just you guys can improve upon. So you have pieces of these. It's just maybe formalizing more of those methodologies there. Your landscape, we do have some recommendations around how to improve that overall technical landscape. Data analysis and reporting, I see this just about everywhere, establishing some better data governance and taking a look at how you can leverage tools to provide what I call better business insights. So they're not just kind of static reports, but you get into an arena where you can start doing actual analysis and really kind of what if and looking at things that can help you make informed business decisions. Improving the user and IT training, and that's, again, not uncommon. Usually training is the first thing that kind of falls off in tight budget times, but it's the first thing people realize they need when things need to be fixed or done. So it's always a double-edged sword there. So, and then documentation, and then again, that's another one that's usually fairly common if you're moving quickly, but just putting together that methodology around your solution and business documentation. You particularly want to leverage that while you have what I call tribal knowledge. While you have folks, if you have folks that have a lot of knowledge that have been there and maybe close to retirement, you want to try to gather that knowledge, get it down on some paper. Ways or recommendations around leveraging new or existing tools. So looking at cloud-based technologies, you folks already have something called Solution Manager, but leveraging that a bit more to help be a technology enabler for some of those improved processes that I mentioned. Reporting tools, and the front-end user interface is just a fancy way of saying there are now ways to put a layer on top of your system that makes it more appealing to your end users, makes it more like something they would see on an app on their phone, something they're more familiar with. Won't spend a lot of time on this slide, A, because I'm not a basis person, and B, because it's just highly technical. But basis is your application layer. It's kind of the core of your SAP system. And so we did analysis of that. As you can see, there are some things that came up that would be recommendations that your folks can do to just improve that overall landscape.
Yeah, and this is Greg. I want to point out that the team's already jumped into several of those.
Yep.
So it's been exciting to see them, work on some of the most critical, Jeremy and the team there. So that's great.
SAP Security, just some high-level recommendations around, and a lot of this, the one thing I want to point out as we go through, I usually do this at the beginning, is it's not always just the system. I tell folks there's a triangle, the golden triangle of people, process, and platform. So we tried to make sure when we provided your recommendations that we frame it up that way, that you're always looking at those three points, because they are all equally important. So along those lines, on this, as an example, in the SAP Security, some of this is establishing better process. Some of it may be roles, so that may be more on the people side, and some of it's technology, using technology to help you put controls into place. And you'll see, like even on here, establish better user security training. A lot of organizations are doing that now just so people have more of an awareness. So that may fall more in your people category. Payroll and HR, this was an area where we saw a lot of items, but it's also an area where we focused a little more time. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better or worse than another functional area. It just means we devoted a little more time here because you folks expressed that you wanted us to. And again, especially in K-12, as I look at this, it's not unusual for a lot of the things around HR to be a bit more manual and to be looking for ways to automate those functions. So you do have a significant level of manual and paper processing. The tough part about that is this is the one area where your system touches a lot of people, right? So everybody is an employee of some sort, and so that's their interaction. If they don't touch SAP anywhere else, they probably touch it there. So if you have a lot of manual processes there, their experience with the system, they can immediately get the perception that, the system's not doing a whole lot, or things are just very manual, or they don't like the interface. So taking a look at how to automate a lot of those processes, how to streamline them. So it's not just the technology enabler of automation, but also a little streamlining of processes. taking a look at how you're doing your payroll and making sure you're not creating extra work for yourself. And creating, again, we mentioned that user-friendly front end, ways to kind of improve the communications across your groups. And that will be important for doing some of the process, what I would call process redesign, and then using those technology enablers around that. Finance and assets, again, you have some processes that are highly manual, particularly around your accounts payable areas. There are ways the system could enable better reconciliations for you and do those more in a more automated fashion. You have a lot of data out there that's managed through spreadsheets or access databases or different things that are starting to age. So we need to look at ways to not only reduce your risk from the standpoint that that technology may no longer be supported, but also to get a little bit of data governance around that to make sure that you're preserving your integrity. You want to make business decisions off of correct data, right? And how you can streamline that. Make sure you're not replicating data all over the place, that you understand what I call your single source of truth. And that streamlines a lot. And then figuring out how to make that information more readily available to your users. Ways to do validation processes and asset transfers. And then there were several recommendations around some of the asset tracking and how you folks can improve some of your processes there. Warehouse management, I know I personally was the one looking at some of this. You folks do a really good job with your warehouse management, your inventory management. I thought it was pretty cool to see all the different ways. I'm used to looking at that process more from, I have a manufacturing background, so looking at it from the manufacturing perspective. So quite honestly, it was really interesting to see how you were using that with your school district. So the main recommendations around there were things that a lot of these ideas came from your folks where they just really wanted a little bit better visibility into the inventory and trying to make sure that you're utilizing inventory you have in-house before you go out and buy more. Around purchasing, some recommendations on some training. I think there's some basic SAP functionality that you folks have that maybe your procurement folks just aren't aware of, that are available to them, that can just help streamline some of the manual steps that they're doing. Taking a look at your yearly closeout process. That came up several times, that was a time-consuming process. You still have a lot of purchase orders that are manually printed. So there's definitely opportunities there around automation. Budgeting, I think you folks are probably seeing a theme here that there's a lot of places where you have some highly manual processes. So it probably makes sense to look at those, streamline them. And when I say that is an important step, because a lot of folks will try to just use technology to mimic a manual process when there may be opportunities to cut out some steps. And then getting you folks some better modeling technology. And I know this year particularly, I know you folks are probably feeling that pain as you're trying to figure out different scenarios. What if we opened up some of the schools, but not all of them? What if we had to open up all of them? What is the cost of this? What if we did this? What would be the impact of that? And trying to figure out kind of that ripple effect across your budget. SAP Project, not an SAP project, but this is actually a tool to manage projects. There is, again, some opportunity for trainings so that folks better understand how they can leverage it. It can be used for planning and budgeting of your projects. There are some capabilities around how to track financially, better track your costs around your projects, and the reporting. Again, you're probably seeing a theme here of improved analytics and visibility. Moving on to some of the additional topics that we discussed. A lot of words here, you folks can go through it later, but essentially our clients are asking, we hear about this S/4HANA, we know that there's, we need to make this move. When do we make the move? A lot of folks are looking at it and saying, we don't have a budget to make a move now. How's this going to work? So SAP did do an extension of the support of the migration to S/4HANA. Their clients, their customers were not moving as quickly as what I think SAP originally anticipated. And so they did an extension. So our recommendation as we looked at what you have and what you're trying to do, kind of in a nutshell, is that you folks should, over the next couple of years, make sure that you're aware of that roadmap and where SAP is going with that. Monitor some of the other, potentially some of your other marketplace options. There's a lot of, I hate to use the term plug and play. As a user, I didn't like that term, but essentially with cloud options, some folks do some hybrid where they use SAP for certain things and maybe pull in some other software where it makes sense and it's cost advantageous. But essentially, the main summary here is that there's a lot of opportunities, particularly with the folks you have in-house, to just make what you have better and not have to pour a lot of money into doing any major upgrades or anything at this time.
Yeah, and this is Greg, and part of that is because SAP now allows you to, initially they were going to cut you off your current system earlier. They've extended that by years to 2027, and you can purchase additional support up to 2030. So there's nothing forcing you to do that today, to take that budget expenditure in the next couple of years to try and migrate your system.
And Greg, do you want to do the third party?
Sure, I'll jump into this. So there's something else that you also asked us to look into, and it's called third-party maintenance and support. And this is where you stop paying SAP, and basically you go to a third-party firm that will manage your third-party maintenance. So they basically freeze your code, they customize it using some programmatic options, and generally it will cut your costs considerably. However, that does come at a cost. So we provided an opinion on that. We basically thought that, while we weren't going to recommend that you do that, because while it's a viable option, right, at this time, your system is really stable overall. It needs some optimization to match your business processes, and some of your business processes could be moved into the system. So we thought that if you were to modernize your current system, and then again, the third-party maintenance providers they have very limited K through 12 experience, especially in Florida. So we thought that was also an issue. And again, with the marketplace evolving so quickly, what we didn't want you to do is make multiple moves. In other words, move to this third-party provider and how they do business and what they're going to do with your code, and then possibly down the road, move to a different flavor of or version of SAP, Workday, Tyler, or some other solution. So our recommendation was just to keep watching it. And then also we looked at other ERP solutions. And we are a partner of, for example, Workday. And we're also a partner of SAP. And we've worked in the PeopleSoft world, and we work with lots of different solutions. So, and we do not sell you SAP. That's important. We don't sell you SAP. So our view on the marketplace and other solutions was that there's a lot of change going on right now. Your system is very stable. These other solutions, we don't think provide enough opportunity to make the jump right now. So for example, Workday, great product. However, it's not ready for prime time from a K-12 perspective. So what we thought that, again, you should just watch the marketplace and it will evolve. And it's totally acceptable to watch the marketplace because nobody's forcing you to move right now from an SAP perspective. You can continue to optimize and do what you're doing today for years.
Okay, so in addition to the findings that we provided, we also put in a suggested roadmap. In the interest of time, again, I won't go into dive into detail on this, but essentially breaking those recommendations into 3 categories: stabilize, optimize, and transform. So the activities that we feel you should do first, and as Greg mentioned, some of your folks have already started working on these, to just make your platform maybe a little more current. There's places where you had to get more current. There's places where you just could firm it up a bit. And then once you have that platform stabilized, and I want to point out that when we say platform, it's also, if you notice where it says, create better business center accountability, communication, some project governance, it really is people, process, and platform. So I should go back to that and say in each one of these categories, there's elements of that. And then the optimization is beginning to look at basic process changes, or maybe getting out of some of the manual forms and automating some of those things, and leveraging your current technology and your current investment. And then under transform, looking at, there might be some newer technologies that you can take a look at kind of piecemeal. It's not a full like S4HANA complete migration, but hey, we're going to do a module of this because we think that gets us where we need to be, or we're going to look into some enhanced analytics, but starting to do some of those more transformative types of projects. As you notice, as I mentioned before, in each one of these categories, there are the elements of people, process, and platform. How do you, better prepare your organization? I call it workforce readiness. How do you make sure that the folks that are supporting your ERP are ready? How do you make sure that your user community is ready? And particularly kind of establishing some of those business owner roles, so you can get better alignment between your business and technology. And then again, the process and the platform. And you will see this for each of the categories, for the stabilize, the optimize, and then, the transform. When you get to transform, you can see they're building blocks. So you're building upon the change strategy for the people that you developed in the optimize phase. So that those things give you that, what I call firm foundation. One of the soapbox moments that I usually have with folks, and when I was a customer in the organizations, are take the time to build the appropriate platform. When I say platform, people, process, and platform, build that foundation of investing in those users, in your support, your processes, and your platform. And then you build something that's sustainable. Then you got something that really allows you to transform, but transform in a way that's sustainable. And last but not least, the question, the infamous WIFM, why is this important to you? And obviously it's about cost savings. People are looking for ways to save everywhere. But it's also about risk mitigation, putting in better controls to improve fiscal accountability. I'm big on that. I was responsible for the ERP system for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I know about transparency laws. Believe me, I know about transparency laws painfully. And so you want to make sure that you are, I call it faithful stewards of public dollars. Reducing steps improves efficiency. It makes process training easier. If you don't have processes with a gazillion exceptions, I see this even, I do a lot of work with Broward, and that's one of the things where they'll say, well, we do this in payroll, except for this, or except for when this happens, and except for when this happens. And then they were wondering why some of their user community was confused what to do in summer versus winter versus whatever. And it's because there were so many exceptions. And sometimes those exceptions are justified and needed, but sometimes you can simplify and it makes it easier for the users to remember what they need to do. Quality of service for your employees. So if you have some of these things, if you can make things more mobile, if you can make it easier, it definitely improves the service for your user community. And then what I think is most important, I tell folks, if you get this back, what I call the business process functions down, for you folks, your core focus is on your students and your community. And so streamlining those things allows you to focus more on what I call your core mission. So I know we went through that quickly, but we'll stop now and see, are there any questions, comments, or clarifications?
Before we dive forward, this is Greg. I want to share my screen just for one quick second. And again, let me know when you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
We can see it.
So again, behind this presentation, we had a multi-hour meeting with a lot of different folks. and we delivered a comprehensive report. So behind that deck and those conversations is an actionable report that was, as you can see, quite detailed. So if we were to jump into any specific area, and I should be able to get there. So you'll see there was an overview. We talked about the roles, the major process streams. Then there was findings and recommendations, and each one of these was detailed as to the recommendation, the benefit, the finding, and again, what we thought the complexity was and some other action types. So there's a very detailed report behind it that folks executed on, that we provided for your folks to begin to execute on related to that. So just wanted to share that real quick. So any questions or comments that you'd like to direct to us?
Okay, thank you. And we're going to take questions. And board members, this was, if you recall, we were talking about our operational effectiveness, and this company came in to do an overview of that. With SAP System, that system, as you can hear, is one of the systems that will really expire over time, and we're trying to make sure we look at our organization because it touches a lot of places in our organization. So we want to make sure that we're providing that and we're not waiting till the year of the expiration, but we're getting ahead and we're planning ahead for that. So they took a look at all of the systems, all the divisions that system touches, and providing this information. I see Mr. Wilson's hand.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Superintendent. So your organization is suggesting that this is not critical. I'm not sure that I would agree with that, but even if it is not critical now, if these issues are not addressed, they will be critical very soon, very quickly. So I'm going to bring us right straight to the most challenging and uncomfortable part of this conversation. How do we get together? How do we get your organization together with leadership here and with the IT department to make these things happen? This is critical. And I know some of it may be budget, some of it may be training, but there has to be a tactical plan. And everything I've seen so far, and this is my term, I'm going to use a term that I'm bringing forward. I'm not suggesting this is your term, but everything I've seen so far is strategic in nature. It's not tactical. So my question is, how do we get this, bring this to a tactical level to make it happen? It's critical. It's no longer we can wait a few years. I know you're saying we are, but if we don't begin addressing it, it is going to be incredibly critical and unaddressable at some point in the future.
You bring up a good point, which is one of the, is this on?
Yeah, I think it is.
Which is one of the major reasons why it's not urgent today, but it's urgent in that we get started. And so the biggest piece for us is that we know it's a multi-year plan, and we want to make sure that we go through, and the hardest part is going to be the people and the process, not typically the technology. And so going through, working with staff in a way that we're not adding a ton of staff to try to make this work, right? We did a pretty quick implementation with focus, and it was very strenuous on staff. What we want to do is build this in for multi-years over time and make sure, one, that we capture knowledge of staff that we know are getting ready to retire. We know we've struggled with losing programmers and having to bring new programmers in. So the very reason we're bringing this forward is because we know it's going to take us multi-year, but we got to get started. And that's a critical piece so that we don't overwhelm the system in trying to keep things functioning and making decisions moving forward.
And I have a follow-up question. I mean, the two things that I heard that really concern me, one has to do with a lot of manual entry and addressing that issue. The second has to do with data governance. How, and you know this is a problem, how do we address that? How do we have that very difficult and uncomfortable conversation between the upper level management and IT and SAP to make these things work? It's not something we can just say, oh yeah, we got this nice report. How do we address this tactically at this point in time? I mean, if we get together and have those conversations, it may be budget, it may not. It may simply be training, and I know everybody is just, absolutely completely immersed in training and all the things we get from the state all the time, but we have to find a way forward. I mean, it's critical that we find a way forward. So I'm pressing y'all to get together and find a solution. It worries me. I got to tell you, it is of great concern of mine, has been for some time.
If I may jump in here and tell you that that's always daunting. That's the hardest part, is getting started. And so when and I encourage you to look through that's what Greg pointed out, the details of the document. We didn't get into that here, but I do think that one of the key things, and it encourages me that your organization recognizes this, is that the first step is starting to put some of what I call the structures in place. So dealing with what would be the critical issues, particularly with platform, making sure that you're current, you have the right support package, you deal with all of those things. But the most critical thing that I see and I recommend is what I call a change readiness plan. And that is taking a look at your organization from the people perspective, and starting to plot out how you're going to create some governance, how you're going to establish the roles of people who's accountable for what, how you're going to communicate changes. So it's not just about, you typically hear people say it's training, and that's, I don't want to say the easiest part, but it's easy to say, hey, I sent somebody to a training class. The actual, what I call in today's world, constant state of readiness, because change is happening continually. And the way to get more proactive instead of reactive is to get some of that methodology. Data, everybody knows that it's always an issue when you've got years worth of data and you're trying to figure out how to make that better. It usually starts with a data governance plan. It usually starts with establishing kind of a pilot group of folks that maybe work on doing a data project, and they start to do that in this structured way using that methodology, and then you can build out from there. So I tell folks it's not impossible. You just pick an area and you start by establishing the methodology and using that in that area, and then you let it start to kind of spread outwards. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. I see Ms. Fields and then Ms. Cunningham.
Okay, so my comments would be, this is a lot to chew on this morning. That's the first thing. And what I'm concerned about is we don't have the presentation in our viewpoint. And for me to be able to even comprehend it, I need to have more time to look at the information and make sense of it, especially since it's so widespread. So my question is, what today are you all wanting from us? Is this the beginning of a conversation, and what is the timeline? And because, again, this is a lot to chew on.
Ms. Fields, this is the beginning. We asked them to take a deeper dive into looking at the operational effectiveness of the district, and this is just the start of that conversation. As you know, they'll be bringing this back before the board, and we will get the information to you all. But I think it's going to be something that we're going to probably need to put on our agenda monthly to start taking a look at what we're doing, how we're processing, where we're going next, because there are systems that we are concerned about. You know, when you're talking about a system touching a payroll, that's the one we don't want to just go down on us at any point, because that impacts our people. So we wanted to start the conversation just to give the layout as they looked at what areas we need to address, where are the areas that we really need to start with up front. But this is just the beginning of that conversation. There's not a decision here today. It's just to bring the information to you, make you aware of it. We would get the hard copies to you, but with Tina and technology piece, Mike and the different divisions, as we start that work rollout, we'll be bringing that back to you more frequently now. This was just an overview of the big picture of the conversation beginning.
And will the costs to implement all these areas be incorporated into your plan?
Yes.
And would there be a timeline?
I think that's going to be Tina, Dr. Barrios' next step. I believe that's where you're going next. Yep. Am I correct?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you. Ms. Cunningham, and then Ms. Miller, then Ms. Reynolds.
Okay, couple things. Number one, I agree, and I think I would like to request a copy of not so much that, but the presentation, because I think that was, considered an executive summary, and that's kind of where we started. Yes, if you could get a copy of the book and put it in our boardroom so the board members can review it at their leisure. And then secondly, and most importantly, I think, this is a lot, but I think when you have time to work with your people, process, and platform, I thought that was a great way that they described it, would be to come back at some point with the timeline. You may think it's 2, 3, 4, whatever years, and maybe give us an idea, you know, we're going to be doing this maybe for the next 8 months, and here's the cost perhaps, or close to it. Nobody's got the crystal ball, and I get it, but as best as we can to see that we've got it broken down into what you all would consider manageable chunks so that we can move forward, because I agree with my colleagues, this is something that, you know, we need to move forward with. And I get this was the overview, but wow, what an overview. There's a lot to tackle, but, you know, in the end, we're going to be a whole lot better for doing that and starting the process. So I just want to commend you, your department, Mr. Perone, your department, Dr. Barrios, and everyone else, because this is quite the task going forward. But you can't move forward and make improvements if you don't know where the areas are. And so that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to do that, and to say, hey, here's where it's broken, now how do we go about going to fix it? So I support it. I think it's important, but I would like to see maybe as we move forward, you know, an actual timeline discussion, and what part is people, what part is process, and what part is strictly platform, because I think those 3 areas can be done in the same, you know, timeline, just in different places with different individuals and so forth. So thank you, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, then Ms. Reynolds.
Thank you.
Then Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, I agree that having it in front of, between fog glasses and old eyes, it's very hard to follow that screen. So if we could get it in front of us in the future, but having that presentation today would help. You know, this is what we talked about in efficiency for the district. And so when you bring that forth in some kind of report or plan with a timeline, estimated savings in certain areas, that would be helpful to go with the cost of that, because we've all talked about, you know, I have specifically have concerns with purchasing the automation of that and the alignment process of that, but that may not rank compared to what another area would. So if you could give that predicted savings along with the timeline and the cost of the areas, that would help, I think, in decision making. But thank you for that, and I'll look forward to getting that hard copies.
Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Townsend.
I concur with most of what all of my colleagues have said. While this may not be urgent today, it's going to be urgent tomorrow if we don't start to plan for it. So I appreciate you all having the foresight to start looking at it now. I will say, and I have pretty young eyes, but it's really, really hard to see that screen. So if we could in the future, please, when you're presenting, bring either, and I don't care if it's emailed to us 5 minutes before we sit down and we can look at it at least on our computers. But if we could please get the slides before, it would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
I actually, in my other life, I literally help sell ERP solutions for a living. So it might be helpful for the folks to actually tell people what an ERP solution is, just like just for the public. And anybody want to like explain that for a second, and why it's so important to an organization as a whole?
Dr. Barrios, are either one of the team members from Meridian?
It's pretty much enterprise resource program, which encompasses all of your business processes. So it's risk management, it's warehouse, it's transportation, anything that deals with your business operations. So overall, you usually have a core ERP system, which ours is SAP, and sometimes you'll have other systems that work with SAP. RHS would be one that we know I'm very nervous about, because it's a homegrown system for recruiting and hiring. And we know from the HR side and the risk side, there is a lot of manual stuff. So part of the challenge is honestly, and we will bring forward some recommendations, is having a team sit down and have the difficult conversations, determine what are our priorities and where do we start, right? Because there's a lot of pieces, and so it's really sitting down to digest and then put it in plan. And some of it is the red urgency pieces, and we've already started on the technical side on some of the security recommendations, but it's really kind of looking at long-term and chunking it out, and looking at where there may be various areas that affect both risk and HR and payroll that we can address all at once with a specific process, if you will. So it is time, it's going to be time consuming, which is why it's not urgent, but it's urgent, because with our existing people, they still have their regular jobs, and we're adding on as we slow down and take a look at what are we really doing in our business processes. And there's a gap in terms of our documentation. We know that. And so that's really the whole point.
And I thank Dr. Barrios, if I may. One of the things I like to highlight there is the word enterprise, right? So if it's really humming, if you guys work at this, it's not just looking at just procurement or just FI. The power in it is being able to integrate that, so that when you're looking at this from the enterprise level, you have one plan for data governance, for example, that applies to everything, and you can start to harmonize data across all of those functions. So when you start getting to that optimize and transform place, what you're really doing in your organization is creating better interactions, better handoffs, better visibility at that enterprise level, and not just in kind of individual process silos, if that makes sense.
So typically, when you're looking to upgrade or replace your ERP system, at least in my experience, there's a process where there's a formal assessment done. That will typically go out for RFP. A system integrator will come in and do an assessment of that, and then that gets put out to RFP for an implementation based on the assessment. Sometimes there's a thing called a phase 0, commonly called. What would we consider this? Is this a formal assessment? Is this a phase 0? What is this that we just saw? Where's this in the process?
This is where do we sit now? So coming in and looking at exactly where we sit now with our systems and with our processes. And the good news is they're not making a recommendation. There's no urgency right now. The good thing is we do have a stabilized system. There's no urgency to move forward. But there are some things that we can do to begin to stabilize and optimize our existing system. And then down the road, and I think that's one of the things they said, because they really are agnostic. They're not saying go to S4HANA. They're not saying go to Workday. They're saying work with your core system today. You don't need to change. And in the next couple of years, when you need to make that decision, then you go back and you look more deeply at various systems to determine, do we stay with SAP, or do we move to S4HANA, or do we do a different RFP? Either way, it's going to be a tremendous amount of work. Jumping from our SAP system to the new S4HANA, which is a completely different architecture, will be the same as implementing a new one. So they're not suggesting either one. At this point, they're saying optimize what we have, because we have enough time to make a decision in a few years as to whether we want to convert to that new system or look at a different one. So we're really not at an RFP looking at new systems. We're looking at what do we have now, and how do we make what we already have work better for us in the next several years, and then watch the marketplace to determine in 2 to 3 years, when we have to make that decision, what's the best path.
But presumably, we're going to do a business process redesign RFP or something like that, right? I mean, what we're just talking, is that what the next step is here, or is it just something that will happen organically in-house?
What we're looking at now is to begin to work on the things that we can stabilize and optimize with our existing system.
Right, but who's we?
So in partnership, it will be our team in partnership with Meridian. So we're going to bring that recommendation forward at the board meeting.
Okay.
So we will share this report with you. I will share the detail and then a high level. And so if you want to look behind the detail, you can. And then we will bring a recommendation at the next board meeting.
So Mr. Towns, if I'll jump in for a moment, what I believe you're asking is, are we going to move forward with the findings from what Meridian found in the alignment? And we're going to have to move forward with it. It's just what they're saying is we don't have to expedite, as in the next several months, but they're going to build out. But as we look at the different systems, as you know, and you see the ones that they had in written and categorized, those we're going to have to make sure we move forward with. My fear is that we wait until the last minute a lot, and then we're all scrambling, trying to prop up systems, and that's what we don't want to do, so we can build out. But when you're saying, you know, who's going to do that, it's going to be Meridian in conjunction with the district staff moving forward, looking at that. Actually, you know, when you look at it, prioritizing which ones we need to begin with first, because those are going to be the ones, RHS and payroll, those are two that's going to impact our employees and their pay. So I'm pretty sure if you look at that, they're high up on the status report of we need to address those very quickly. So when they bring back the timeline each month, and I see Mr. Perone's getting up, when they bring that timeline back as well, those different things are going to come back to you as where do we start first, who's going to do what work. But it is going to be with people, because we do have a lot of our staff that have this knowledge base, that can actually help build these systems forward with Meridian as we go forward.
Right. I mean, I'm not actually questioning that at all. I'm just trying to get a sense of where we are in the overall process, and these integrations tend to be almost entirely human issues, because the processes underneath are what flow up into the technology and make it work. I guess what I'm trying to establish is, for instance, in the HR area, the payroll area, where it seems like we do have quite a bit of manual customization there. Is there a possibility of upgrading to a different module? Like, the cloud-based version of that for SAP is called SuccessFactors. I don't like it is. Are all of these problems we're discussing solvable at the human level in the short term? I guess is my question. Or should the board, it's not going to be me. Should the board expect additional recommendations for software upgrades, et cetera, in the short term? And what might those be? And then again, I might just ask the folks on the call, like, what do they consider what they just did? Is it part of an implementation process, or is it just kind of just an overview of something that's not really categorized? Like, again, there tends to be kind of a phase zero assessment implementation process. Is this none of those things, and it's just sort of a kind of where we stand look? What do they consider it?
This is great value. Can you hear me? I just switched to the computer version, so I just want to make sure everybody can hear me.
Yeah.
What again, so I want to stress this was an assessment of your current processes, mainly related to certain technology systems. So it wasn't necessarily a deep dive into your system itself. It looked at a lot of high-level processes. It looked at how your people are interacting with those processes, and it did look at the technology in certain areas. So what it is it's a good level set of your current state. So I would call it a current state assessment of your main systems, mainly SAP. So that's where we are there. And again, one of the things that I want to stress is that although we're talking a lot about technology, when you look at our recommendations would apply really to, there's a lot of process areas for improvement. There's a lot of what I would call, when you see documentation, when you see how we're suggesting you manage certain projects, those are things that we try to stress that regardless of what direction you go forward with, if you were to move away from SAP to a different solution, there's a lot of fundamental items from a process perspective that need to get fixed, right, or optimized in some manner. So again, I think hopefully that clarifies it a bit. And as far as SAP and an ERP, we actually produced, I think about 7 years ago for you, a video on everything that SAP does for the district that we'd be happy to share again. If you'd like me to send on the link to it. It's hidden on our website, no one can get to it. But it goes top to bottom and explains in functional terms
what SAP does, how it helps the students, how it drives all the different business processes around the district.
And Greg, if I may jump in there too, when we talk about process redesign, the one thing I want to remind everybody, and it was a high-level assessment, but when we're benchmarking, a lot of times what we're benchmarking against is best demonstrated practice for your industry, meaning, public sector or sometimes even more specifically K-12. So it's not like you're completely reinventing the wheel because there is some best demonstrated practice. And then on top of that, a little bit of what I call lean methodology. So it doesn't have to be kind of old school, we're going to completely do a redesign, but it's a lot of times what we do is we come in, we say, let's take a look at what you're doing. And what is I like to say, what is the justifiable business reason why you have to do this step? And a lot of times people say, I don't know, the other person before me told me I had to push this button. And that may have been true 5 years ago. But there may be an improved way of doing it or a different way of doing it that folks just weren't aware of. So a lot of times it's just doing some basic, because I have more of a user-centric approach, I would call it journey mapping, user journey mapping, and looking at that user journey and figuring out where you may have duplicate steps or where steps may no longer be needed because technology has changed or your business needs have changed. So, I look at it more, and this is the approach I take with a lot of school districts. Let's walk through your user journey and just very fundamentally see where we can lean it up a bit right away so you can start, you talked about savings and you talked about value, so you guys can start realizing some of that incrementally. And yeah, maybe after you get to that stabilized, because being very blunt, you have some things you should probably get fixed like now, right? But once you get to that, that's that stabilize. And there's some things with your folks that you should probably put in place. But once you have that, as you start moving towards optimize and transform, when you get to the document, you'll see there are some things where you might be able to use some cloud options instead of just using your current system because the cloud option may be friendlier for your users or integrate well. But I would start with the stabilize and start getting people used to the idea that this is kind of an evolution. That's the word I would use. It's not as much a 1 year big transformation and you're there, but it's a sustainable evolution. Does that help?
Yeah, well, just one last thing. What I think I hear reading between the lines is you guys could have found that this is a burning platform that's falling apart, that we can't sustain it, et cetera, and that's what's causing whatever problems we have. But that's not really what you found. You found that for whatever reason, the practices we have in place are not getting out of the functionality what the functionality provides. That there's not really a problem with the technical architecture as a whole. Is that correct? I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
There's some optimization of your platform. There's some things you guys can do to get more current. So I don't want to de-emphasize that you do have some platform items, but I do think a lot of it is leveraging functionality that you may not realize you have or that you may just need to develop somewhat. But the real tough part of this, that's why I always say people, process, platform. A good chunk of it starts with process, and then that requires some changes in how maybe some of the things people do or the way they do them. And then also, some changes in the technology enablers. You may have to, you talk about some of the databases you have. That's going to be to put them into a core system or to change that. That's going to require some technology development, right? But as you're doing that development, I just highly encourage folks not to take what you have and just put it into a new technology. And I think that's the point Greg was getting at. You guys make this investment now in starting to lean your processes and start to teach your folks why that's important, regardless of what system you go to down the road. You're going to be in a better place, and that's actually going to ease the pain of whatever you transition to. So if you haven't figured it out, I'm kind of the OCM person, the change management person, and I always say that the first step is getting your organization to understand, to become a culture of change, so that folks are more proactive instead of reactive. But you do have some things that you need to stabilize first. So it's generally in good shape, to answer your question.
Yeah, and this is Greg, thing that changed during this project was that SAP went and extended the life cycle of your current product. So your current platform was expiring several years earlier. And I think that was part of what was driving some of the questions around your current platform was, 3 years from now, we're going to have to get off this system or start to get off the system. What do we do? And as this project evolved, SAP had went and changed actually their end of life for this product. So that's why we brought that up and why we thought that was significant, right? You're not forced into doing something. Now it's what should we do that's best for the district and the folks in the district. And not that you would have done that before, but your back's not up against the wall the same way.
Thank you. And we have another question from Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank the superintendent for engaging Meridian in this assessment because we started this when I first came on the board. It's been 6 years in the making, and I don't know who spearheaded this, but I just want to say thank you a million times over, and I want to thank the superintendent for having the vision to make this happen. And I know Meridian has provided detail, but again, this is just as difficult as this has been for everyone, and I know it has been. This is just the start. The really tough part comes when you sit down at the table and start working through all those details. And I think that's when we as a board start getting the answers to our questions once you get to that point. So, and there's some great questions, but I think we may be a little bit out in front with the questions because I think that's when we're going to have an opportunity to ask the tough questions. But that's going to be the toughest part. And I'm going to encourage everyone who's ever spearheading this to please keep it moving because it was 6 years to get to this point. We don't want to spend another 6 years moving forward with it. We want to start those conversations. That's the toughest part. And Ms. Berry, as you know that, you've been through this. That is the most difficult part. So thank you, Superintendent Berg, for making this happen.
Thank you. And we will keep it moving forward and bringing you the updates. So thank you very much. Thank you, guys. We appreciate you. We'll move on to our next item. Our next item that comes before you will be the professional learning catalog, which was known as the Master in Service Plan. And this is something that we do annually. So we'll have Ms. Joe to just give us a brief description of what's going before us.
Good morning, Board. Superintendent, Ms. Cunningham, Chair. Every year, our district has to turn in what we offer for courses for our teachers and learning. And it used to be called the Master in Service Plan. In 2019, it became Professional Learning Catalog, which fits more. So there are a catalog of courses that you need to have to be certified in any area. It's one element that is a comprehensive system designed to improve performance through professional growth. And this is an annual plan. Another thing I'm excited about is that we have our first school board autism spectrum disorder add-on program. This program, the state had us turn it in last year. It got approved by the FDOE. The autism spectrum order has already gone through board approval, but it is now in action. And this is that you can earn so many points to become certified in taking care of our most precious children, autism spectrum children. And it equals 12 semester hours or 240 in-service hours. This is exciting and this is personal for me as I talk to Ms. Miller and others. I wear an autism bracelet that I just have. My nephew, who was in school in Palm Beach County, the second day of school last year died. He was autistic and could not verbalize that he was choking to death. And so it is so important that we recognize students that have these learning disabilities, that we are specially trained. So this autism spectrum disorder, any teacher that wants to go through this course, the state hasn't made it mandatory yet, but any teacher that wants to be certified in autism spectrum disorder, they may. So these are the two things that I'm bringing to you this morning, Mrs. Bird, and thank you. And if any of you want an autism bracelet, and it's my nephew, Kadar Williams, and it's his foundation, so we're going to, our group is going to pay it forward, and money for these bracelets will go to a foundation in my nephew's honor, and help kids go to college, and so it is exciting to have this as part of our program. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Ms. Joe. I appreciate you bringing that. I would like also to encourage our administrators to go through that course. I think so many of our administrators just have never met your nephew or someone similar. And so I think it would be an opportunity for them to learn how to react. So I appreciate you having that for our teachers as well. It's not mandated yet. It probably will be.
Okay.
The spectrum covers such a broad group of students from the very highest who are mostly, excelling as our savants almost, to people like your nephew and my Michael. So I appreciate you having this available. And I encourage our administrators to, because in the end, if we want to talk liability, they're the ones that are liable for things like that happen in the schools. So I want them to be able to, I want to give them the tools to prevent or even help the success of all their students.
Yes.
So
Thank you. And my nephew was supposed to have a one-on-one para, and he did not during that lunchtime. So thank you so much, and I will be passing out one of the bracelets for all of you before the end of the board meeting today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Joe. We appreciate you and appreciate you looking out for some of our most vulnerable students. So thank you so much. Board members, the next item that you're having to come before you will be our secondary Perkins grant application, and Mr. Cochran is bringing that forward at this time. Ms. Armstrong is with him as well. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
First, I'd like to introduce Ms. Shakita Armstrong, who works with me and coordinates our Perkins grant effort.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right, and we have a slideshow presentation. We'll be bringing it up. Of course, you should have the slideshow in front of you. And you need to put it in present. Try the one down at the bottom. Further on. Yeah. Oh, that should work. Okay. Well, it's not projecting, but
We have, I think everyone has a copy of it in front of them.
everyone does have a copy.
We do have a copy.
So we
of it,
can
yes.
go ahead and get started. Well, while Judd works on it. Well, the Carl Perkins was originally passed in 1963. It was renamed after a state representative from Kentucky who was a big proponent of career and technical education, named Carl Perkins in 1984. The purpose of the Carl Perkins grant, which we've received since that time and receive yearly, has three main purposes. It supports CTE programs with funds, supplies, and equipment, and other additional costs beyond what a normal classroom may expect, beyond the expense of a teacher and books. It supports building pathways from the middle school to the high school to post-secondary, and it also encourages local school districts to work with local workforce agencies, including CareerSource, our local advisory boards, and our program boards, in order to present to the public students that are ready to work and ready to go to work in their local communities. I see we have the slides up. Good. We received 3 types of Perkins grants. The one that we're going to talk about here today is the secondary, but we received 2 other Perkins grants, one for the post-secondary, which goes to Travis and Ridge, and we receive a smaller Perkins grant for our DJJ programs. We're currently in the process of having the post-secondary grant being approved, and we just got the RFP for the DJJ Perkins grant, and we will be putting that application in before November 17th. The new authorization, the Perkins 5, has some additional requirements that have not been required in the past. One of those is the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. Ms. Armstrong is going to tell you a little bit about how we met the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment requirements.
Okay, so the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, as Mr. Cochran said, is a new requirement for the new Perkins 5. It is required to be done every 2 years moving forward. This was the first year. The CLNA requires engagement with stakeholders, and in just a moment I'll talk about some of the things that we did with those stakeholders. The major component of the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, we needed to look at a few things. We needed to look at the size, the scope, and the quality of all of our CTE programs. So when we think about size, we wanted to look at where was each program intentionally designed. Did it have intentionally designed pathways? Meaning, are the middle school students afforded the opportunity to earn high school credit while in middle school? And if so, can they continue their studies in high school in the very same program? The other thing that we looked at was the quality of each of our programs. That had to deal with engaging instruction. Are the state and CT curriculum frameworks being taught with fidelity? And does the curriculum being used teach the standards academically, technically, and employability skills needed for the students? The third component we looked at was quality, which has to deal with appropriate instructional supports. We looked at each program to see if they had the proper instructional materials, equipment, and technology, and what are the different types of support and frequency of supports provided to the CTE teachers and staff. So that entails the size, scope, and quality. When we looked at this, our findings were 44 programs were offered and 39 met the size, scope, and quality. And those are unduplicated programs. So we were at about 88%. In high school, we offered 42 programs and 38% of them met size, scope, and quality, which was around 90%. Another thing that we looked at was our labor market analysis, and are all programs aligned to the current and future labor market needs within the local area? And we had 100% of our programs that were aligned. Some of the things that we did with our stakeholders is we had some guided discussions weekly at the district office. We met, we looked at data, we analyzed the data. We talked about the different things that our programs needed as far as support. We talked about our stakeholder groups, who we would share our data with and who we would gather input from. We did mass surveys that went out to administrators, teachers, students, parents, business partners. We also did various presentations. We presented at the ESC Advisory Council meeting, as well as the District Advisory Board meeting. So basically, the CLNA serves as the basis for the local Perkins application for future decision-making regarding our CTE programs. And once again, it will be done every 2 years moving forward. The next thing that we would like to review with you is our Perkins budget. You should each have a copy. It is behind your PowerPoint presentation. And if you'll give me just a moment, and we can also project that as well. This is quite lengthy, but I did want to go over the major components of this so that you can see how we utilize our Perkins funds. We have some salaries that are written into the budget. We have 3 CTE resource specialists to support the overall CTE program initiatives, to include ongoing monitoring of size, scope, and quality of our programs, and then they do various other things. In addition, we have 2 CTE resource specialists who will monitor the ongoing progression of the comprehensive local needs assessment. We have 2 CTE analysts who will work with and support our CTE teachers and students in the area of increasing our earned industry certifications and facilitating technology integration in order to improve the academic and technical skills of CTE students participating in our career and technical education programs. We have a part-time Perkins project coordinator. And then the rest of the budget is broken down with, our programs. We have 3 resource program TRSTs in our office. They oversee our programs across the district. So we set aside money for our agricultural, industrial arts, and public service teachers for their professional development throughout the year. We also set aside money for salaries. While those teachers are away from their classroom, we have salaries for substitute teachers to be paid. And then the teachers that fall under our family and consumer science and health services, they also have a certain amount of money that's allocated for them to engage in professional development. And while they're out, their classrooms would be covered by substitutes as well. And then the same for our business, marketing, and information technology umbrella. I do want to point out one thing. When you see the program numbers, we have several programs that fall underneath each of these categories. We did not list them all. We listed the program numbers. So you can see that this covers a lot of our programs. And then the next big section is our materials and supplies. This pays for consumables for our CTE programs. Once again, it is broken down by the umbrellas, the agricultural, industrial, and public service programs, as well as family and consumer science programs. And then we also have money set aside for our business, marketing, and information technology programs. And then we have our travel. We have in-county and out-of-county if we are able to travel. We did not want to exclude that. We still kept it in, but we are working on a contingency plan to repurpose that money if we cannot travel. Most of the travel occurs late spring, early summer, so we still wanted to put it in just to be safe. And we have that allocated for each of our CTE umbrellas. And then we have rentals for each category again, our agricultural, our family and consumer sciences, and our business and marketing. And the last big section, as you know, we participate in NCAC accreditation each year. We have gotten multiple academies accredited. We have 10 academies that will be going through reaccreditation this year. So we set aside money to pay for our NCAC Career Academy reviews. And then we have a section, materials and supplies, for if charter schools have our CTE programs, then we set aside money to help them with some of their supplies. And then we have indirect costs. That is the end of our Perkins presentation. So we will open up for questions right now.
Thank you. I see Ms. Miller and Ms. Cunningham.
Thank you, and thank you for having this available. I appreciate that, especially when we have technical difficulties. Can you tell me if the Perkins Grant allows an allocation to help with our diversity in our academies and workforce programs? Mr. Cochran and I, we've talked about it, and he's implementing things to help work on that issue. But I know for my tenure as someone engaged in the community and with the board, that's always come up, whether it's abilities, diversity, and different learning styles, or if it's diversity in our ethnic populations, making sure they're represented, making sure we're offering it, making sure the middle schoolers at some of our Title I schools have the same information that maybe the other schools have, so they can start asking about these programs, or even in the elementary schools, so they know if you want to go into this program, this is the path you need to take. The community feedback that I've received is just trying to get that message to some of our Title I schools who the parents may not have that information to put the children on that track. And we want to build diversity in these programs.
Well, one of the things that the comprehensive local needs assessment required us to look at how we were serving our diverse populations. And although we find that we are serving a significant number, we're still behind, like most other districts, where the number does not automatically match up to the number of students with disabilities that we have. So there is a gap, and we realize that. So one of the things we started to do last year, I spoke to the ESC Advisory Council last year and talked about our opportunities in our CTE programs and in our academies. Additionally, we're using some of the funds to target schools that have a high number of at-risk students. It's written into this year's Perkins Grant, but we also had it in last year's Perkins Grant, where we paid for a teacher to be at Kathleen High School, paid for that completely out of the Perkins Grant to start a Power Academy there because of the high need of students there. So those are some of the things that we're doing to focus on our high-risk, at-need students, including our students with disability. But we're always looking to expand opportunities for them. I've talked with Ms. Kendall at Roosevelt, and we are committed there to expanding the vocational offerings at Roosevelt and turning it into a sort of unofficial technical high school with a heavy emphasis on career and technical education.
Wow, that's great news. We've worked for years to figure out what to do with Roosevelt, so I think that would be a great path to go down. But beyond children with disabilities, schools that have a high percentage of at-risk socioeconomic children, I'm thinking of volunteers at North Lakeland Elementary that would like for those fifth graders to know what's available. Do we have anything that targets our elementary Title I schools to show them what's available as they go into the middle school sectors?
Well, the plan this year was to show those opportunities to the students at the middle school by bringing them in lieu of having the school showcase. Of course, this year we're not going to be moving students from place to place unnecessarily. What we plan to do this year is a way to get more of the word out. It's going to be a lot more virtual options and advertising for our programs. We're going to be doing Facebook Live discussions about the opportunities at each school. I'll have the middle school principals in these Facebook Live discussions that we're having to talk about the opportunities. But as for this year, it's going to be all virtual. In the future, we'll be bringing students from at-risk schools into their feeder schools to show what the options are for them. Additionally, they'll be informed about schools of magnet schools and schools of choice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. This is always one of the most exciting presentations to me, so thank you for being here this morning. I think I can safely say that we have one of the most robust academies in the nation. I've lost track of the count. Can you tell me exactly how many we have as of today's date?
Well, we are waiting to get back information on 10 other academies, but
Yes.
right now I believe we're at 25, and when we get our information back, we'll be over 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how we continue to expand the opportunities for our career academies throughout the county. I find that this is an opportunity a lot of times for students to find a place to belong. And I think anytime you offer that, particularly in the world in which we live, I think it's such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for these kids. So I just want to say thank you, appreciate your presentation this morning. I support, obviously, going forward with the grant, securing the grant to continue to move these forward. And we really appreciate all the work that you do behind the scenes, because in my opinion, it makes an incredible difference in children's lives having these types of options as part of their education in Polk County. So I just want to say thank you and kudos to you and your team, and look forward to growing them even more. So thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. I see Ms. Fields, then Ms. Reynolds.
Mr. Cochran, I know we've made a lot of progress in this area. I know that we still have to work on diversity and getting more minority students in all of our academies. So I know that we're doing that. I was interested in knowing what offerings do we have at our DJJ facilities as it relates to vocational and career opportunities.
That's a great question. I want to point out that right now our DJJ facilities are shrinking. We just recently closed Bartow Youth Training Center. That was a decision by the company not to have that program anymore. Last year, Highlands Youth, which was a very large vocational DJJ center, closed down south. So right now, what we have is Eckerd Connects, which has been renamed the Strive Academy by the Eckerd's company, and we have the Halfway House. At Eckerd's Connects, we offer a business class, and at the Halfway House, we're focusing on agricultural and construction.
So do we do an assessment, an interest assessment from the students there to see what they're interested in doing and trying to have some offerings in that way, or how do we determine what courses we have?
Well, unfortunately, there's such a small number of students there. There's only 24 students, so we can't provide all of their interest areas. So that's why it's kind of a more general science-based agriculture construction, agriculture class, and some with some construction elements into it, mostly constructing things that are related to the agriculture program. As for what we do for an interest inventory, we use My Career Shines, which is the state free program that is offered to us. It's quite extensive. It not only will do a career assessment, it will then point them in the path on how to get into that career. It starts building a resume for them. And as a matter of fact, it will build, at the end, it will build a resume for them online that they can give to a potential employer, and they can access it through the website. It will take them directly to the student's resume online.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds.
And just adding on to what he was saying about My Career Shines, they're partnering too with Bold Vision, and through Talent Pipeline, they're ensuring that many of our businesses locally are set up to receive those resumes and things from My Career Shines. So that's a partnership that goes beyond just the academies. I had one question about the document you attached for the previous current year versus the requested budget. And it looks like we're down about $100,000 from what we were, I'm not sure if it's what we requested last year, if what we received. Is there a reason that we would request less money?
Well, one of those reasons is there is a roll forward that comes at some point in the year. Shakita,
it's usually around late October, early November.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were squeezing them for every penny we could get.
Yeah, we'll get that roll forward, but there was a slight decrease by about $30,000 in the original amount. So
Okay.
I'm sure that's based on the current economic situation.
Okay, I couldn't tell from this if that was what we were requesting or if that's what we were receiving, that 1.2 million. So I just wanted to make sure we were requesting as much as we could.
We request everything.
Awesome.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both for the presentation today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. The next item that is coming before you will be our policy updates, recommendations by Neola, and we're going to have Ms. Dodge that she will bring those forward. And I believe, does everyone have the executive summary? I know it's on your agenda if you need to. I know she's pulling that up.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good morning.
Enjoying this, I'm sure. So before you today, we have 3 board bylaw updates. The first one is our definitions, and what it does is when the legislature passed their anti-Semitism bill requiring that to be included in our policies, we're adding a definition of that to our definitions, and also the definition of social media is being added to our definitions, and because of changes being made to our web apps and services policies. The next 2 are related. The standards of ethical conduct and the conflict of interests are being updated to include language that says the board will adhere to the standards, their decisions are made in the best interest of students, and that they're decisions of the board and not individuals. And then similar language is placed in the conflicts of interest bylaw, and it refers to specific examples and situations for board members that would be considered conflicts of interest. 1120 is employment of administrators. That is being updated to include language regarding providing support to employees who did not initially get a passing score on the GK exam. The same language is placed in our instructional staff employment policy and in our support staff employment policy. So that's 3120 and 4120. And the instructional policy also establishes a definition for in-field instructors as well. And then our entrance requirements policy is puts language in there regarding preference for students who are transferred in because of military orders, their families on military orders, and the same for our controlled and open enrollment policy, which is 5121. And then the final policy is annually we update our absences for religious holidays policy to put the correct religious holidays into the correct month because they fluctuate from year to year. So that is the end. Are there any questions?
Ms. Miller, then Mr. Townsend.
Sorry. I have a few questions. I'll just go as they're listed.
Sure.
The social media that we're adding, I do get a lot of questions from community members, and especially parents, on those things. Do we have and this might be for the superintendent, do we have a clear system of reporting for those kinds of things that is available to people, or I can direct them to the website if they feel like one of these there's been a violation per this policy on social media? Is there clear, maybe on the website somewhere to guide them to report that? Or
Are you talking about their personal social media or on our site?
Well, if some of this, where users engage each other for information, ideas through text, video, social media consists of all the forums. It talks about online forums, whether we're there or if the community is engaging with us on online forums. Like, is this spelled out on our website so I can just direct people to our website for?
Ms. Tasha, did we spell it out in the, I know you worked with PR once before regarding something with policy and social media. I don't know if did we get to the point of spelling it all the way out with them? I think y'all start moving in that direction and then some things change. Am I correct? Or
Yeah, so this currently just places a definition of social media into our policy. We are also working with all of our stakeholders, including public relations, on an actual social media policy that will be brought forth to you. It's a new policy, and those types of things would be established in that policy when we bring it forward.
Okay, so there might be more than one policy that both touches on that, so they can, if they have questions, they can refer to them both or separately.
And they would be linked to each other if there's anything related in there.
Okay. On the next one, there was some language added. Board members must have a sincere desire to serve the educational needs of the community. Decisions must be based on the best interest of students and not on a political or personal interest. I think everyone has this sincere desire, but just as someone who's very technical and with legal terms, how do you declare a sincere desire? Like, I don't know. I mean, that might be a Wes question. If someone's going to question someone's sincereness.
That is just squishy.
That is not a legal explanation, Wes.
It's just squishy. It derives from the statute. It's fact-based, and I guess if someone came in and alleged that it wasn't, there'd be an opportunity for a neutral magistrate to determine that. But it's squishy language.
Is this something that we're reacting to? Like, why? I'm just curious. Like, this all comes from Neola, and is it time frames? They bring new language.
In their explanation of what they were doing here, they said it was a reflection of standards in state and federal law, which I included in the explanation. Their recommendations are always reviewed by Florida attorneys prior to them bringing them to us. But I can certainly go back to them and ask them if that was placed because of any specific language in federal or state law, or
just for legality, it's hard to determine someone's sincereness, and that may be. I can't imagine anybody who does this not being sincere. But for the community, that would be something we'd have to have a legal standpoint. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this before. Each board member must recognize the decisions must be made by the board as a whole, and when they made these decisions, must be supported by the entire board. That's something we've always practiced, and I think that's been written elsewhere. We're just adding that again.
They're placing it in the bylaw, which the bylaws are generally directed to the board and reflect, are the board's bylaws, as opposed to the rest of the policies are staff, the entirety of the district.
Yeah, and that comes into question after people, have personal statements on certain issues, and then we make a decision as a group, and it goes forward from there. But I had just seen that in other places, and I didn't know why we were repeating it again, but thank you for that. The next one I have is the conflict of interest policy. I apologize, I'm just trying to get all mine out, and then people can move on. Okay. No board member may solicit any, all of these things listed. No board member, any person on the behalf of the board member can accept things, and including entities doing business with the board, political committees, or committees of continuous existence, or form of a lobbyist who lobbies the board. Mm-hmm. So political committees giving to board members obviously is a conflict of interest. That is not during campaigning, or is that all times?
Let me just take a look at exactly what it says. My understanding was that it was throughout the year, but so that's about soliciting and not, like, you can't ask for it, but if it shows up.
It's also a very gray area. You cannot ask for it, but if monetary support comes through campaigns from PACs, political committees that work with I'm concerned mainly with charter PACs that come through, and I would hate to put a board member in a position to where if you accept support based on your work, that's one thing. But is it going to be? Am I going to have concerns now?
So the language is about soliciting and then accepting gifts. So if they write you a check as part of a campaign, that's a gift that's not a gift. This is language is talking about if they send you a box of chocolates like right before a vote or something along those lines.
Okay. Is that good? If it, okay, that's fine.
So, C3 is board members, their spouses, or campaign committee shall not solicit any vendor or any employee of this district to make contributions to any political campaign or testimonial. I guess my question's more for solicit. Many organizations do interviews for endorsements, and then end up endorsing with the check as well. Where, and that may be a Wes question, where does that, should we not?
I'm trying to figure out which line
Sorry.
you're
At the
looking at.
very end, under C, additional provisions, number 3.
Thank you. That was next on my list.
Sorry,
It's okay.
that's where you were.
Yeah, no, that's fine, because the testimonial, I'm concerned, nobody should be out soliciting employees for contributions to anything. If a political campaign solicits testimonials during a campaign, is that now against policy?
Repeat the question.
If this says, board members, their spouses, or campaign committee shall not solicit any vendor or any employee of this district to make contributions to any political campaign or testimonial. The testimonial, I understand the first half of that. I'm not sure why the testimonial, what you're going to have is teachers and staff that support candidates now put in a very compromised position that they cannot vocally support candidates.
So I'll let Wes weigh in, of course.
Okay.
But the way
You're looking at paragraph 3 honoraria.
No. Under C, additional provisions, which is the last
C,
section at the very end, and
It's
we're on the
paragraph 9.
conflict of interest, which is 142.2. So the way that I read that and interpret it is to say you can't ask them, but if they want to do it on their own, which I think is how we've always proceeded.
Yeah, that is precisely what that is for, is to prohibit the solicitation. It does not prohibit you from accepting campaign contributions and things of that nature that are voluntary, unsolicited, and comply with campaign laws.
So it doesn't really answer my question. So for example, PEA, and I'm just going to pick on you, Stephanie, because you're sitting in front of me, but they do interviews normally for candidates for their endorsement and for a donation from the PEA's PAC. Where does that stand as far as soliciting
you're not
donations?
soliciting them at all.
Okay.
They come to you and then they talk to you.
Gotcha. So if they do the interviews,
Yeah,
then it
I do
doesn't.
not
Okay.
believe that falls under that provision.
And also PEA itself is not an employee or a vendor of the district. Their
But
members
it is,
are.
I mean, they're all, yeah, all of the people interviewing are members. I just don't want to get anybody thrown in jail. I'd rather know the rules beforehand.
What about generalized? If you say, hey, if anybody wants to do a testimonial, contact me. That's as opposed to laying the wood to somebody. I
would be reluctant to do anything that appears to open the door. I think it is just as much a solicitation if you look into the camera and say, anybody who wants to give me money can send it here, as it is to pick up the phone, call somebody and say, would you send me money? So I think if they are doing those sorts of things and they want to talk to you and they invite it, great. But I'd be very cautious about, give the term solicit its normal meaning. Don't ask them for it.
Ms. Miller, I know you have a couple others.
I would like to see what other districts have listed. Not everyone uses Neola. Very few in the state use them. And I don't know if this is reactive. I hate to say this, but I always think of the larger district as somebody doing something they're not supposed to do. Like, why are they adding this language? Because the problem with that is, yes, nobody should be asking for money or testimonials specifically to employees to make them feel like they have to. But when you rope in campaign committees asking for donations and or testimonials, I just think that what this could create is campaign issues with people who may not have relationships in the district or with staff or with teachers who may not have, the inside or, they might not have experience. So this could be a tactical response to a candidate who was very popular with staff. And so I think we need to be cautious of the language. And if it's going to be the candidate themselves, that's 100%. But to go in and rope in an entire campaign committee that they can't ask for testimonials, I think is very restrictive. And I would like to see what other districts have.
Oh, may I? I don't see it as, these are our board bylaws. So these are the standards by which the board is supposed to conduct itself. And it doesn't necessarily, I don't see any problems for a CCE or an employee. This is about how the board conducts itself in terms of soliciting testimonials and soliciting from CCEs and employees.
I would like to see what other districts, I'm just curious. I appreciate you.
I'll bring
looking
that
at
up. I'll email some samples from other districts, both Neola and non-Neola, in between the final board approval.
Okay. Thank you. I know Ms. Fortney has a question.
Yeah, I have the same concerns Ms. Miller does about that, but I also have some other questions as far as some of these. But my main thing with what Ms. Miller was saying is this a state statute or a part of the Code of Ethics now? And as far as what we were just talking about, and then I wanted to go back to some other ones, but I'll let you finish answering that one, Ms. Dodge.
My understanding is that these are taken from either state or federal law or the Constitution. And when we first adopted these bylaws, we generally took the shortest version. And Neil has now recommended a more substantive reading or inclusion of those statutes into the bylaw.
That is my understanding as well.
Thank you.
All right, if we could go back, then I'll just start from the beginning if that's okay with everybody. On 0124, I think it was page 7, page 1 of 3, A, number 1, about not causing harm to our students. I think in light of COVID, this kind of brings me to a general question. I've had numerous people talk about the lack of ESC and mental health supports. I've had people call me in tears every day. I'm not quite sure that we're upholding number 1 on that. I want to go also back to what Ms. Miller said, same section E. It feels like when I read that, it felt like that we just basically, if the board, which I have always done, if the board votes, to uphold something, the way that is written to me, it just means we can't disagree. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't. It just means we can't. And then I want to go down to 5121, the open enrollment, the application, and paragraph 1 talks about now how our open enrollment is only going to be available online or on portal, and I know that's what we kind of did this year, and it marginalized and underserved population, especially my migrant kids in my district. The same with the responses. We have parents that don't have emails. They don't do anything electronically. That put a burden on our staff at our schools to try to get some of our underserved population. I feel like we're punishing kids. Same with B, C, and D in that same section for having parents that aren't electronically capable of contacting schools except through writing or written applications. And then I'll listen to your answer.
So that language was recommended by our information systems staff because that is how they handled the controlled open enrollment process this year. And so we could certainly take it back to them and see if they would be willing to take any sort of paper applications in addition to the online process.
Thank you very much, because it really was an issue for quite a few students, and I just don't want any kid left behind.
Understood.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Miller, then Mr. Townsend.
I'm going to pick back up where I was, back with conflict of interest.
Okay.
Section C, number 6. Board members are prohibited from acting as an agent or attorney for compensation for anyone in connection with the matter in which the district is interested in for 2 years after their board service terminates. Do we have the same ruling for our staff members? And I'm only asking because some of us are relatively young on this board. and staying in education I don't know, I don't have any plans to work for a contractor, but there may be links beyond time served, and I just wanted to know what the staff policy is.
I'm going to have to go back and check because I don't remember there being anything for staff related to that, and it makes sense because staff is not elected. You know,
Right.
These are for...
And sometimes we lose some of our district staff to vendors.
Right.
My question is limiting. I'm just curious, and I'd also like to see the history with other districts on that, because I know a lot of board members who go on to work in education, and it somehow may be linked, but you wouldn't want to prohibit that. I understand not linking for monetary gain while in office, obviously, but 2 years after seems lengthy. I just would like to see the outside of unlimited options for people who aren't lifetime service to only the board. So just that would be interesting. I appreciate what we're doing with general knowledge examinations. I think it's giving opportunities for people who are struggling to get that test completed. I understand is that giving them an extra year, giving them a 3-year status instead of a 2, and they'll still be paid as provisionals. I'm looking at Tedra. No.
I'm not sure where you went from.
I'm sorry. I went to the next one. Employment of instructional staff.
Okay. So you're looking at the language regarding...
We're using the word adjunct teaching, which I thought was very interesting in post-secondary of us. So yes, maybe Tedra could come up. And I think this is the benefit for teachers that are struggling with the general knowledge. It's D. It's
okay, those are 2 different issues.
Okay, both of those are.
Just welcome to come up, but
I was trying to condense because I feel like I'm absorbing too much time.
It's fine. So the GK language is just statutory language that requires us to support anyone who doesn't initially get a passing score.
Right.
And the district adjunct teaching certification is also a new statutory opportunity for the district to certify adjunct, either part-time or full-time adjunct instructors. And so we're just adding this as part of our who we can employ, and part of that is people who we certify under the new statute for adjunct certification of adjunct
employees,
teachers.
Okay, so thank you, Tedra, for joining the tables, because I think the community would like to hear more about that adjunct position.
Well, Wendy has done a wonderful job of explaining it. But essentially, it was added, I want to say last year, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019. What it does is it allows us to hire adjunct teachers for specific sections. So let's say you teach at Polk State. Let's say you may not necessarily want a full load, and let's say you live in Bartow. So we could hire you to teach math or algebra, geometry, one of the higher level maths, as an adjunct teacher. So it gives them a certification, a specific certification from the Department of Education, and it allows that process to be much more fluid and easier for them to attain that certification. The issue, though, from our perspective, has been we just don't pay enough, to be frank. So that's it.
Oh, you just don't get enough?
We don't pay enough.
Oh, you don't pay enough to attract that, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
If I would add, this came about last year in a discussion because we have the hard-to-fill areas.
Correct.
And we did have some teachers at our colleges, and some of them said they would. And I do believe we had Bartow, which was one of the ones that we utilized someone at that time that was looking for an adjunct position. And then after that, that's when they said they can issue that type of a certification, so they're able to go in the classroom. And so they're able to help fill in those hard-to-fill areas. That's really what we were targeting when this language came about last year in our discussions.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms., was that Ms. Miller? You're still?
She's on probably the same subject matter, so I think it's probably better for flow if we let. No, I think it's good to stay within the.
Is there a reason that so for the certification, it looks like we may have had an option for C, district certification, or D, district adjunct teaching certification?
The optional language was the district adjunct teacher certification. Not all districts are offering that, but our district is planning to, so we included the language.
Is the difference, because it looks like the adjunct teaching certification is for 3 years, and it doesn't look like there is a time limit on the district certification? I'm just trying to figure out why we're not offering the district certification, because it sounds like that's more our career and technical, which would be like having a Lakeland Electric employee that teaches classes for the school district.
That district certification language is current language.
Okay, gotcha.
And then
So
we're
it's
adding
not.
to it with the adjunct
Okay.
language.
I saw the
sorry.
X next to district, which is why the D, which is why I was thinking that was our selection. So that makes sense, though. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the open enrollment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The application and preferential treatment paragraph, we've removed for residents outside of our county so that we're taking out the statement for residents of other counties, applications participate shall be accepted at the beginning of the first Monday in May and ending in the last Friday in May. And so I just want to get some clarification. People outside of our county, is that going to affect the Four Corners area that crosses lines into Polk that want to apply, or are we talking about people who are planning to move here and making those requests but not current residents?
So people outside the county are still eligible to apply, but we used to have two different timelines. We would do in-county first and then out of county, and now it's all one timeline.
So everybody's the same timeline?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that might be good for equity. And my last, before I stop with all of my questions, I appreciate the absences for the religious holidays being addressed. Is this something from Neola? Have we used local input on some of these? Because we are taking out many that I have never heard of, but may be very important to someone else.
These do come from Neola every year.
Okay.
And they actually, when they come from Neola, they come at like a certain date in August, and the date always moves in August, and sometimes it moves to September or November, and it's all over the place. So what I've done is tried to synthesize it down to just these holidays are in this month, and these holidays are in this month, because the date doesn't really matter. It's just the opportunity to have an excused absence that matters.
Right.
And so if you see something taken out, it's just because some of them weren't actually they were holidays, but not religious holidays, and I'm not sure what the big difference was this year, but they did narrow it down to strictly religious holidays this year.
So the community will have time to review this per the agenda if they have input on certain religious holidays that our community may have people interested in keeping or something.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. That was all my questions. I would like to see, and I know this is the first reading, but I would like to see especially that conflict of interest again, since we're going to look at other districts around us and verify with our legal department describing people's intent. I'm not a lawyer, but that makes me nervous. Thank you.
That is aspirational sort of language. Once again, it's hard to disprove.
Thank you. I know Mr. Townsend, you still had a question?
Yeah, so related to the ethics part, I've got the way a lot of this is written, I've got a lot of problems with. Starting with, let's just start, what's the enforcement mechanism for this? Like, if someone sees an employee who gave money to a candidate, how does one determine if that's a violation? Who has standing to inquire about that?
So again, these are board bylaws, so they are rules for the board and not necessarily for staff. They're how the board conducts themselves and not policies that impact staff. So it's whether you solicited an employee to give money to a campaign and not whether the employee gave money. Does that make sense?
Well, again, I understand that. I'm curious about what's the mechanism for going after a violation of it. If someone wanted to report a violation of it, would it have to come from the person themselves who had been solicited? What's the actual mechanism for that?
Mr. Bridges, can you weigh in on that, please?
We've discussed from time to time that, the way our Constitution and laws are set out, school boards have a difficult time policing themselves because the board does not have the authority to sanction one of its members. There's ceremonial things that you can do, and from time to time you hear about censure and whatnot, but it has no legal meaning. Most of the provisions that are set forth here arise from the statutes, the laws and regulations that prescribe ethical conduct. And if there's a violation of those, then the first stop is the Commission on Ethics, and anyone can make a complaint to the Commission on Ethics. I think certainly if there was a situation in which someone had complained to the board can discuss this, have a conversation about how it wishes to conduct itself and proceed under whatever those circumstances may be. But if it arises to the level of a violation of the rules of ethics that apply to agencies such as school board members or specifically to school boards, then that would be a matter for the Commission on Ethics.
I mean, let me be clear. I'm fully supportive of no solicitation of money from people. I think that's a good prohibition to have. Period. I'm curious, like, if you're a candidate running and you say, in a general sense, if you'd like to solicit or give a testimonial about me or about your experience in dealing with me, but you don't specify that it's an employee. If it's just out to the world and employees respond to it, is that considered solicitation?
I think that these laws and rules are interpreted pretty closely, and so if there was a complaint of that sort, whoever was reviewing it would look at the facts and in all likelihood would make a determination that was not a solicitation of a particular individual or group of individuals, unless, of course, it was the facts suggested that it was made in an environment that under those circumstances would capture those individuals. But I think those things are read pretty tightly.
Right. I mean, what we're all trying to avoid is a person of power being able to lean on somebody they have power over and say, give me money or give me testimonial, while at the same time we want to protect people's ability to say what they want to say and support of folks. And I think maybe this language could use some additional specificity, maybe saying that a generalized request for testimonial that is not directed to individual or employees or something like that. Just something to think about. I don't think we're going to solve that here. My bigger problem with this is the last one let me just ask, is this all language that Yola wrote? I mean, this is the Yola's writing?
Yes.
Okay. The last one says, each board member must recognize that the decisions must be made by the board as a whole, and that when made, these decisions must be supported by the entire board. I think, again, let's take this out to a specific example. We had the bridge prep charter school folks came before us. The board voted one way. At the next meeting, the board changed its mind. Is that violation of the policy? I mean, like I think the way this is written, it makes being critical about any particular decision, any effort to change a policy, unethical. And I think that's insane. Again, it might be better to have some specificity around this, but I mean, I think policies are not, I mean, they're meant to be changed and adjusted over time, and that's the whole point. If a policy is approved, and then you can't, and you are obligated to support it if the rest of the board does. What does support mean? What is?
Okay. Mr. Townsend, you have Mr. Wilson would like to weigh in. I think Ms. Fields wants to weigh in
on that. That particular issue, we, as board policy, agreed to Robert's Rules of Order. And that was a procedural matter. That's why that happened. It was a procedural matter that was appropriate under Robert's Rules of Order. So I think that's why that happened in that way. That issue wouldn't impact anything happening here. That was a Robert's Rules of Order matter.
But that doesn't answer. I mean, like, look at the Lakeland City Commission and their mask mandate. Are they not allowed to change their minds once they voted that they want one? I mean, like, how do you? It's limiting the ability to advocate for positions. Like, I mean, I doubt that's really the intent, but it certainly reads that way. And secondly, I don't know if you guys have read the reopening court decision, but it says specifically that reopening is a political issue. The word it uses is political, not legal, not anything else. So when you go up to the top and you say, decisions must be based on the interests of students and not on political or personal interests. Well, obviously personal interests, but the courts say these things are political interests. I mean, how are you supposed to address things that the courts say are inherently political without having a political point of view on them? I mean, if I was voting for this today, I would strike that whole board members' sincere desire thing. It's undefinable and constraining, and I would strike the one behind it because you're taking away. I mean, so what we're saying is, anytime a board member criticizes a decision the board has made as a body, there could be an ethics complaint filed against that board member for doing so. Is that what we're saying?
Ms. Cunningham?
Okay. Hearing, your comments, Mr. Townsend, I think maybe we're going to sit here for the next 2 hours going over this because everybody has an opinion. It's kind of where we're at. So I would like to ask staff at this point, because we need to move forward. We have a special work session in 15 minutes and we still have items. So I would like to ask staff if you would be so kind. You've heard the comments. If you would go back, as Ms. Miller has asked, and research some of those fine points. And, I can't answer your question about what the reopening of the governor. That's got nothing to do with what we're talking about here today.
It absolutely does.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't to me because we can't affect that. We simply cannot affect that with these points that are being brought forward by Neola. I'm sorry.
I'm not really sure why you're getting angry about
I'm not getting angry.
I'm trying to clarify what the impact of this is for all board. I'm not even going to be here. You guys are opening yourselves up for any time you criticize any decision as an individual to get an ethics complaint filed.
Okay. So if you would be so kind and check into those issues, I would be most appreciative, and then be prepared whenever you can at the next work session or beyond let's discuss it a little bit more. Maybe we'd leave a little bit more time at that point in time because we truly need to move forward, but I know there's other folks that have comments or questions. So
there is. Madam Chair, you have Ms. Fields, I believe Ms. Fortney, and then Mr. Wilson.
I believe if we go back and look in our new board members manual, there's a statement that's very similar to this one about each board member must recognize that decisions must be made by the board as a whole. And I think basically what this should be in everybody's mind is that if we vote on an issue and I'm against it, and if the majority rules, then I'm not to go out and just slaughter the board members that made the decision to go forth with the vote, whatever it may be. And I think that's what it's saying, that even though I might not agree with the vote that was made, that I am supposed to move on and support whatever is in place to better our students and our school district. That's what, again, the manual that I don't think we really use, that was designed for us to refer to from time to time. So those are my comments, and I agree with Ms. Cunningham. I think we need to move on and come back and review these items at another time. I don't know the urgency of it. I don't know if it's something we have to have done immediately, or if we have time to do more research and see what other school districts are doing or whatever.
I can certainly bring the standards of conduct, ethical conduct, back to another work session prior to bringing it to the board for a final vote, if that's what you'd like to do.
Yes, that's what we'll do.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Fortney, you had a comment?
Yes, I actually wanted to address the adjunct teacher. They are not covered under collective bargaining agreement, correct?
No, they're not.
Does anybody else feel like that this was a play to maybe circumvent unions from the state? I'm just throwing it out there.
Ms. Fortney, actually what it was to help fill some of the hard to fill areas is what they were doing when this came about, when the conversations were happening last year. So.
Yes, ma'am, I get that, but.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilson?
Just very quickly, I think we're conflating different things when we talk about our bylaws and the State Ethics Commission. Our bylaws are just guidelines for us to abide by. There are no consequences. I think Mr. Bridges indicated that. The consequences come from the State Ethics Commission, and anyone can file a complaint of any nature with the State Ethics Commission at any time. So they make the decision then if somebody has broken the state ethics rule and all. So these are just guidelines for us to live by, and they sound like sensible and reasonable guidelines for me, from my perspective. So I understand there's some valid comments being made, but I'm not sure that it warrants an awful lot of time, of staff's time and effort to do that research. They're just guidelines for us to live by.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
Thank you for confirming that this isn't on some kind of quick timeline, because I think we do. If it's in writing, it's portrayed as something that we should all be in agreement to and following, and the gray areas are too gray. So I would like to see from other districts and possibly other, like you've mentioned, doing. So this will be brought to another work session, I'm assuming, not straight to a board meeting.
The standards of ethical conduct, I will bring back to another work session prior to bringing it to the board for final approval.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dodge. I appreciate it. The next item coming before you is Ms. Usher. She's going to come up. You have a land purchase for across the street from Bryant Stadium. And while she's coming, if you remember when we purchased Bryant Stadium, we actually entered into the contract that we actually received first right of refusal for the purchase of the property across the street from the stadium. I would recommend to this board to purchase this property because we're utilizing that stadium for many venues, and it allows for parking as we're having events there, and it's within the community, and when they have the other events that for, I believe, is Florida Southern, and we can utilize, we have a partnership that we've been talking to them about. So I'm going to let Ms. Usher briefly talk to you about that purchase.
Thank you, Mrs. Bird. Yes, just to recap, the city came to us because we have the right to first refusal. First of all, good morning. And so they came to us if we're interested in purchasing the property. The city allowed, as Mrs. Bird said, us and the college to use the parking area. And in the purchase and sales agreement, they gave us the first right of refusal. This is our stadium. This is Henley Field, owned by Florida Southern. So both of us, for our events, were able to use the parking lot across the street. The problem here with our stadium is we have very limited parking. We only have 14 regular space and 8 handicap space with a seating capacity of about 6,000. So we really need parking. Besides the parking over here, the hospital allows us to use the parking, and sometimes we do some grass parking, but we desperately need parking for this site. The parcel up in the north, this is 1.9 acres, and here it's 2.07. I talked to the city, and they'll abandon the alleys, and then it'll be 2.26 for a total of about 2.4 acres. Looking at the property and the layout, it could accommodate about 180 to 200 parking spaces. The city's appraisal. Without the alleys, the city's appraisal came in at 137,800. With the alleys, which is the alleys, there are like 6,000 square feet. With the alleys at 146,000. Our appraisal was higher in this case, 148 without the alleys and 157 with the alleys. Based on the license agreement, the purchase agreement, we should take the average of both appraisal for the sales price. I talked to the city, and the city has agreed to sell for 146,000, the lower price. They agreed to abandon the alleys, so we'll have 2.4 acres. We'll come back to you with the joint agreement. I know Mr. Talbot has spoken to the athletic director for the college, and verbally they agreed to improving the property for joint use. But we'll come back, we'll work with them on that and bring that back to you. We'll continue using the parking area in its current condition, and this item is on the October 27 board.
Thank you, Ms. Usher. Mr. Wilson?
I'm sorry, what college is it?
Florida Southern.
Florida Southern, okay, so they would theoretically then use it during the day, we would use it for football games?
They, sometimes, I have the dates. We use it the most, but they'll use it like from February to May.
And in
With
return,
high use.
and in return for letting them use it also, they've agreed to do some improvements to it.
That's correct, right.
Okay.
And certainly, if there's a conflict in use, we will get priority. It's our property.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about that. I just think it's great that we're working with someone to find solutions for everybody. And I think the price is great. How can you beat that? And they're going to do the improvements. That seems like a win-win.
The college will.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Great job.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Ms. Escher. I appreciate you giving me this information, and we talked about this already. I, too, think that it's a good opportunity for us to collaborate with the college, not only to offset the costs, but to show that with the usage from both, that we'll both be picking up the liability of improvements and using that area. I do want to ask, the city will still provide the policing to cross the street there, and our liability is no greater with this purchase.
We will still have the police officers for event to
because that's really a busy road.
Right. Yes, that's Florida Avenue, so we will still have that. But the thing is, it'll be our property, so I'll have to work. I'm working right now with the attorney drafting the purchase agreement. So since it's our property, I think we'll have the liability on it now.
So trip and falls and things would be on us on that property.
It depends on how it's written. But
okay. I'd like to see that. I appreciate that. And I also want to thank the city of Lakeland. The first right of refusal, like Mr. Wilson referenced the price. I know that that's valuable property there and could have been sold commercially for much more, or usage could have been other things. So I appreciate them working with us to provide that parking for that facility. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Usher. The next two items is going to fall underneath Human Resources, and Mrs. Porteous is going to come to you with item number, whichever that is, 6 and 7. Thank you.
You've lost track. Good morning. I'll be brief. The items before you are to downgrade a specialist for pre-employment to a senior tech. This position recently became vacant, and so I took it as an opportunity to really review the duties of the position and then make the adjustment needed. So it will move from a pay grade 17 to a pay grade 16, and we will advertise it. The duties associated with this is really to report all of the fingerprinting for all of our school district employees and all of our volunteers, any contractors that we have, and feed that directly to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and their database. Every 5 years, we have to resubmit our fingerprints just to make sure no one has committed a felony, and then we'll be barred from employment. So this position will handle that, and they will work with a personnel assistant as well to make sure that the clerical duties are performed accurately and that no one is outside of the compliance period.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Reynolds?
It says on here that there's no budget impact, but my guess would be that it will be a cost savings if it's a lower.
Yeah, it's a low. I'm sorry
I just wanted
about
to make
that.
sure that we're highlighting that that is a
I
way
apologize
to save
about
money.
that. Actually, it will be a significant cost savings. The person that was previously in the position was well paid, and so I anticipate the starting salary being at the much lower end. So it will be a significant cost savings for the district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is, let me get it, sorry. The revised instructional calendar. So in June, no, what's this month? This is October. I forget when, I apologize. Earlier this year, when COVID first started, we brought to you a calendar that included 180 instructional days. Mrs. Yoakum at the time wanted to reduce the amount of days based on other districts and their reduction of days. At that time, we were not necessarily comfortable with that because the state had not yet approved it. However, in looking at everything, the state has now approved a reduction of the 180 days. And as a result, we've revised our calendar to also meet that need. So as you can see, the first quarter, the last day, I pulled up the wrong one, I apologize. The last day will now be June 3rd instead of June 10th on that calendar, which means that that's the student day. And then the last teacher workday is Friday, June 4th. Instead of June 10th. So let me say that again. The last student day is now June 3rd instead of June 9th. Right. And the last teacher day is now June 4th instead of June 10th. And that is moving up one additional week. You'll notice that we also made some other changes in there just to make sure that it was properly aligned, meaning when grades are due for teachers, we adjusted those dates as well.
Thank you.
With no loss of pay, right, Ms. Porteous?
Oh, no, ma'am. No loss of pay at all.
Thank you.
And just for your information, looking at the calendar, we approved it at the July 14th.
Thank you.
2020 meeting. So
I thought it was June, but thank you.
It's okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ms.
Ms. Reynolds?
Crazy.
For the end of the first semester, previously it was the 28th, and it now looks like it will be, the beginning of the second semester was October 28th, and now it looks like it'll be October 26th. There have been some questions from parents that are looking to move from e-learning back onto campus that I believe it was advertised they would move back on the 28th, and if they would lose 2 days of learning, which when they first started bringing it up, looking at the schedule, I was like, no, it starts the 28th. But if we're moving it to the 26th, will those students moving back to campus be able to start on the first day of the second semester, or are we going to have them wait until that Wednesday?
So I'll let Mrs. Townley, if she could come up and address that. She worked with me on the calendar.
Good morning. So the difference in the dates have to do with grades posting and the processes and focus for students' Q1 grades to be finalized and how our teachers have a chance to review. So what we've instructed our principals to do in our meetings with them, or if students are transitioning, those would be the students impacted. The students that are already in brick and mortar should be just fine. But for their e-school teachers, to go ahead and give them assignments for the 26th and 27th, because some of those teachers may very well be transitioning back into the building as well. And so as we see student needs from parent requests, that's the plan, is that they'll have work to do. They won't miss 2 days of instruction, but that it will be in transition, and then so that they can report back to the building on the 28th if that's their desire.
Okay, and can we get that information out there on social media and other
Yes,
places so
yes,
that
the team's been
parents
sharing
know?
that information. We've been in communication almost daily about answering specific questions, and they send it out prior to the 12th, and then they send it out again, I believe, on Monday.
Okay.
So,
Perfect, thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. With no further questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that concludes the discussion part of our work session for today, and we just still need to briefly have the executive
Yes.
session.
Yes.
in Light Oak.
I'd like to go ahead and we'll go ahead and finish our work session here. And I would like to ask that all the board members present, along with our attorney, if you could meet in the room across the hall. We have a executive session that shouldn't be too long. And then after that, I'm going to say around 11:45, I'd like to go ahead and begin our special work session on our superintendent search. And I did see that our FSBA team is already here and ready to go. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Before we depart, I'll go ahead and just announce on the record, the executive session is one that is specifically allowed by law under Chapter 447 for the school board to discuss matters related to collective bargaining. It is limited to that. It is not a public meeting, but I wanted to make sure everyone understood that the board is going into executive session for an authorized private meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
perfect. So at this time, is there any other board comments before we recess, if you will, or close up the work session for now? Anyone? Okay, then we'll meet board members, if you'd be so kind. I think probably take a minute or two break if you need to, and then if you'll be so kind and join us across the hall for the executive session. And that concludes this work session for October the 13th. Yeah, go ahead. You're allowed to potty, I get that. I totally get that. No, here we are. We're not too bad. I think we'll make it, because I just don't want to be disrespectful to them for as far as they've traveled. But I already told him we're running behind, and he said he's okay. They're not going to another